Fusion GPS decided that people needed to know about the FBI investigation into Donald Trump, and they started talking more about that.
You're talking about Jim Comey as FBI director, his public statement that they were reopening the case just like 10 days before the election, looking at Hillary Clinton's private emails. And so at that point, Fusion GPS on behalf of the Clinton campaign decided, well, they needed to do something, so they were going to, so Steele agreed to put the Russia investigation, the investigation into possible collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia, into the public sphere for the first time. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's what Glenn Simpson, the head of Fusion, has testified to the congressional committees that are looking at this now. So on October 31st, we see this article written by David Korn of Mother Jones. He doesn't name Steele, but he talks about a Western intelligence source, and he talks about how there are these intelligence reports. He doesn't use the word dossier. No one had thought of that yet. But these intelligence reports that have been given to the FBI, and his piece sort of questioned, what's the FBI doing about this? Are they investigating? And so our understanding is that moment really causes kind of a break between Steele and the FBI. That they had actually, in Rome, been talking about bringing him on as a paid contractor to continue this work after the election, after his contract with Fusion ended. And after that news story broke, the relationship essentially ends, is our understanding. There may be more that we don't yet know about that, but from the FBI side, apparently, according to Devin Nunes, they fired Steele. Friends of Steele have told us that they believe that he kind of cut off contact. He was angry. He didn't understand what was going on at the FBI. He said he wasn't sure he wanted to be a part of this, and he broke it off.
Listeners, if you have any questions for Washington Post correspondent Rosalind Helderman about Christopher Steele, her deep dive article, co-authored with another Washington Post correspondent, Tom Hamburger, this week, asked the question, hero or paid informant. 212-433-WNYC, 212-433-9692. You can ask about Steele's motivations, content of the dossier, whatever is relevant. 212-433-9692 for Washington Post correspondent Rosalind Helderman. So Rosalind, Trump likes to dismiss the Steele dossier as full of fake stuff, but I think it's not fake. He reported things he had been hearing from Russian sources that were mostly unverified. That's very different from fake. Can you give us any kind of scorecard on what was in the dossier and what's been verified or debunked or is still uncertain?
I think that's extraordinarily hard. There's actually a good bit of literature out there about this, where people kind of go through line by line and try to assess this. You know, Senator Mark Warner, the vice chairman of the Intelligence Committee, said just last month that the dossier remains at this point unverified, but also not disproven. And that sort of gray area remains kind of amazing. People forget there are a few things in the dossier that get all of the attention, but the 36-page document has a lot of other things in there. It has a lot of sort of nuanced discussion about internal politics within the Kremlin and how the election operation was being viewed by different factions within the Kremlin, whether they thought it was being successful or not successful, whether it was risky or not risky. And a lot of that, U.S. intelligence probably has a good sense of whether that's accurate, but I don't think the public does. The core allegations as they relate to Donald Trump, that Russia has these compromising videos of him, that there was actual coordination. I mean, people might forget the dossier actually alleges that there was Trump Organization money being paid to hackers as part of the cyber hacking operation. Those things remain to this day unverified. And I think that we won't have a sense of whether or not some of those things can, be knocked off the page. They're definitely not true, or if there's some truth to them until the Mueller investigation concludes.
Is there a way to say how verified any of the stuff is about Trump being a blackmail risk, compromised by what Russia might have had on his financial dealings? Like Michael Flynn was compromised by what Russia had on his contacts regarding sanctions?
I we can say about that is that Trump has obviously strongly denied it, and there is no proof that's yet emerged that either of those two things are definitely true. Obviously, there's a lot to know about Russian money that came into the Trump organization. Russians who bought condos in Trump buildings, and the way that that helped prop up the Trump empire sort of in the 10 years before Donald Trump ran for president. But the notion that Russia was blackmailing Trump, either with financial information or with compromising videos, we have no evidence of that at this moment.
How verified, well, what about the Trump and sex aspects of the Steele dossier? What's actually in the dossier about that?
Sure. Well, the dossier alleges that the Kremlin holds videos of Trump, and that those videos relate to an incident at the Ritz-Carlton Hotel in Moscow, where Donald Trump paid prostitutes, to urinate on a bed. That's the allegation. It's the famous P-tape allegation. It's the thing that seems to most upset Trump that is in the dossier, and I think we should very clearly say that we have no evidence that's true.
I wonder if official Washington is dismissing that less now, though, that we know about Trump's lawyer paying off porn star Stormy Daniels to be quiet about an old affair with Trump, and that payment to her shortly before the election. I guess she had something on him. Did the rumors about Trump in Russia have new credence because of that, or are they being treated any differently since that revelation?
I think every person has to decide that one for their own, for themselves. I mean, I think that when we first learned about the dossier in January 2017, there were few people who didn't have some sense of Donald Trump's colorful past personal life, and that figured into how people saw these allegations. The Stormy Daniels allegation, adds to that. But it's a far way from a brief affair with a U.S. porn star to precisely these allegations about prostitutes. So, I think I would be remiss if I didn't, say again that we don't have evidence at this point that that's true.
Let's take a phone call. Sharon in Manhattan, you're on WNYC. Hi, Sharon.
Hello, thank you for taking my call. I just wanted, I'm sorry, I haven't been listening for the past 2 minutes, so if you went over this, please forgive me, but
Sure.
There's something about this, the narrative of Christopher Steele that I wanted to raise, and that Glenn Simpson, in his testimony before the Senate committee, he says that the reason that Christopher Steele backed off from speaking to the FBI was that on October 31st, 2016, the New York Times published an article whose title was "Investigating Donald Trump, FBI Sees No Clear Link to Russia," and that that became a confusing point, because he had this relationship with the FBI, and then the Times had published this article saying, oh, there was some conclusion made that there was no link, and that spooked him a little bit. I guess pun intended, but that spooked him a little bit, and he backed off a little. And I was just wondering if you could give credence to that, or if you have any more information about that.
Rosalind?
If your guest, yeah.
That's a good point. So we talked a little bit about what was going on at the end of October that causes the rupture between Steele and the FBI. And your caller makes a good point that there were a few things going on. We went over that a little bit quickly, but one, and my understanding was it was the largest one, was the Comey announcement of reopening the Clinton investigation, and Steele's confusion over that announcement, given that he had been told that the FBI did not do that. But the other was indeed this New York Times story that suggested that the FBI was in fact not investigating Trump in Russia, or maybe that they had investigated it, but it was over. And so all of these things, according to Simpson, led to confusion, anger, fear, worry on the part of Steele. And so, he's a British citizen. He doesn't have to work with the FBI. And I think from the Steele side of things, it was his decision to sort of back off at that point. Now, one thing we note in the story, which I think is interesting, is that special counsel investigators actually went to London in September of 2016. So now we're talking nearly a year later, and debriefed Steele over 2 days. So the rupture happened, but eventually the special counsel decided that Steele had something he wanted to hear about, and sent folks all the way to London to hear it.
Lisa in Manhattan, you're on WNYC. Hi, Lisa.
Yeah, hi. I'm wondering why there's so little mention of Paul Singer, who originally, this was Republican money that got Steele started. And what does that have to do with all of this? Why is there so little mention? And how did it get over to the Democrats?
Right, it's a great question. And we mentioned at the beginning that Steele was funded that Steele was funded by both Democrats and anti-Trump conservatives. And right, the particular one, Paul Singer, who owns the Washington Free Beacon. And so to Lisa's question, I think a lot of our listeners, even who know that fact about the original funding for Steele's research into Trump and Russia, the fact that it came from anti-Trump conservatives, how did it, what was the sort of natural history of that? Why did they, and how did it become a Democratic thing?
So I'm really glad I got this question, because there's a lot of misconceptions about this, and the timeline is complicated and confusing, but it's actually not right that Steele's research was funded by Republicans. Let me lay it out for you. What happened was that Fusion GPS, this Washington firm, was first hired in the fall of 2015 by the Washington Free Beacon, which, as your caller noted, gets a great deal of funding from Paul Singer, to do research about Trump. So they were conservatives who were concerned about Trump's possible nomination, and they wanted to know more about him and his business. So Fusion gets started on this project, and they look at a lot of different things about Trump and his business, but one of the things they start to research is Trump and Russia. And they start to realize that if they want to know more about that, they need more from people who can talk about Russia, not just sort of open source documents, which is what Fusion generally does. So what happens is that the Washington Free Beacon contract ends. It ends in the spring of 2016. April or May is what Glenn Simpson has testified. At that point, Fusion is hired by Perkins Coie, which is a law firm that was working for the Hillary Clinton campaign and the DNC. So the contract is taken over by Perkins Coie, and then in June of 2016, Fusion hires Christopher Steele and his company. So while it is certainly true that Fusion did work for both conservatives and Democrats who were both opposed to Trump, the Steele work and what is now the Steele dossier was funded exclusively by Democrats.
Now, these dueling memos, Nunes and the Democrats, are about whether the Steele dossier was used legitimately to get a surveillance warrant on former Trump campaign advisor Carter Page. How does Carter Page show up in the dossier?
So Carter Page shows up in the dossier quite early and in a number of the reports as a Trump advisor who was key, according to Christopher Steele, to coordinating between the campaign and Moscow. We knew at the time, and Steele noted, that Carter Page, who was this kind of off-the-wall Trump advisor, went to Moscow in July of 2016 to give a speech at a university, which is kind of an unusual thing for a presidential advisor to do, to kind of jet off in the middle of advising a presidential campaign to Moscow. And the speech he gave, which was public, was rather critical of U.S. foreign policy and U.S. sanctions, which was interesting. Steele went on to allege that while he was in Moscow, he met with two particular Russian officials, the head of Rosneft, which is a Russian energy company, and a high-ranking official in Putin's government. And so that was the particular allegation that Steele had made, and which apparently in some way figures into the warrant that the FBI gets to monitor Page in late October. Now, Carter Page has denied that he met with those two men. He has denied it many, many times in many forums. But what's interesting is he has acknowledged that he had a brief greeting, I should say, with a different Russian government official, and that he had a rather long session. He went to a bar, he watched a soccer game with a guy who, while not the head of that energy company, Rosneft, was a key deputy to the head. So the allegations that Steele makes have been denied, but he definitely went to Moscow and he definitely met with some folks while he was there.
George on the Upper West Side, you're at WNYC. Hi, George.
Good morning, Governor. Today's Wall Street Journal has a major piece, and what it does is, in effect, the way I read it, is to largely attack anything that comes from Steele, and that they're pushing the same arguments the Republicans are alluding to, which is something that has a taint to it, in this case because of the Democrats behind it, and that Steele himself is biased and the rest. I'm wondering, first of all, if you've had the chance to read the editorial today, and as one who's covered this subject so thoroughly, if you have any comments about it.
Well, I haven't seen that particular editorial, although it sounds like it's making arguments that are now sort of familiar to the discussion. That,
that's an editorial, that rather than an article.
I see.
Is that right, George? It's an editorial?
That's correct.
Oh, okay, yeah. And it sounds like from what you said, it's making the standard Republican arguments rather than adding a lot of new information, like Rosalind's article in the Washington Post.
It's a bit surprising. That's why I'm wondering, because this whole apparently the underlying issue behind this, of course, is to in every way possible discredit the source material for FISA and the rest, and thereby taint everything else that comes obviously as a fruit of it, given the way the legal system works.
In the Mueller investigation. So, George, thank you. And as we run out of time, it's relevant to ask right now, Rosalind, you report that Steele has been interviewed by Robert Mueller's team. I didn't know that before, personally. Is that a new revelation?
I think it has been reported. I think CNN maybe had a report on that a little while ago, but for some reason it didn't get a ton of attention, and so we thought it was a helpful fact to resurface. I don't know that the kind of length of time and the timeline had been reported before, so we can add that it was in September. They went to London for it, and they spent 2 days doing it. So they clearly thought he had something worth listening to over something of an extended period of time.
Then all this Democratic versus Nunes memo business doesn't matter so much in a way, does it? Mueller's the only one getting at the truth.
Well, and we don't even know whether the Carter Page warrant actually figures into the Mueller investigation in any way. Nunes told us that the FBI opened a separate counterintelligence investigation on George Papadopoulos, someone we know does figure into the Mueller investigation, in late July, well before any of these things happened with the warrant. So, it may be that this was all stuff that happened, worth looking at to see how the FBI interacts with sources, but not actually related to the Mueller probe.
Yeah. So last question. Why isn't Steele doing media interviews now to defend himself from these Republican attacks and Wall Street Journal editorials, and try to clarify that he went to the FBI because he was really concerned about Trump and Russia and American and Western democracy, rather than because he was a political hack?
Well, there are ongoing lawsuits. He's been sued in UK courts for libel by a Russian technology executive who was named in one of the dossier reports. There's also ongoing litigation in this country against BuzzFeed, which first published the dossier, and Glenn Simpson and Fusion. There was just a court hearing, I believe, earlier this week in London on the question of whether Steele will have to be deposed, which he and his lawyers are fighting. So friends of his say that he would certainly like to do that, but feels constrained until these lawsuits are wrapped up.
I see. And the Republican chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, Grassley, I understand, has referred Steele for a criminal inquiry into whether he lied to the FBI. Do you know the basis of that?
Yes, according to Grassley, and it's also Lindsey Graham, they did that jointly. The FISA warrant submitted to the court indicated that it included some discussion of a particular article that had appeared in Yahoo News in late September 2016, and the DOJ told the court that FBI did not believe that Steele had directly provided information to Yahoo News. Later, as part of this litigation I was just mentioning in London, Steele has told the London court, the UK court, that he briefed Yahoo News in late September. So the basis of that is, why did the DOJ say that to the judge. Was it because they had been told by Steele that he did not talk to Yahoo or other media?
I see.
And if that's the case, they're asking, should he be investigated for lying to the FBI?
Steele might have lied about leaking. All right, Rosalind Helderman, co-author of a really interesting deep dive into Christopher Steele and the dossier in the Washington Post this week, called Hero or Hired Gun: How a British Former Spy Became a Flashpoint in the Russia Investigation. Thank you so much for sharing this with us.
And thank you for having me.
This is WNYC FM HD and AM New York, WNJP FM 88.1 Trenton, WNJP 88.5 Sussex, WNJY 89.3 Netcong, and WNJO 90.3 Toms River. We are New York and New Jersey Public Radio, where it's time for the latest news with Shamita Basu.
Hi, Brian. Both Democratic liberals and GOP Tea Party forces are swinging against a budget measure that Senate leaders hope to approve sometime today. The plan would shower the Pentagon and domestic programs with an extra $300 billion over the next 2 years. Last night, Democratic leader Nancy Pelosi set a record for a speech on the House floor. She spoke for 8 hours in hopes of pressuring Republicans to vote on protecting Dreamer immigrants, or undocumented immigrants brought to this country as children. But it is seen as a defeat for many people pushing to resolve the plight of Dreamers. Anu Joshi with the New York Immigration Coalition says the budget deal is no longer a viable solution, but they're not giving up.
We will continue fighting. We will continue to hold our elected officials accountable. What we need to remember, and what members of Congress need to remember, is that these are real people's lives.
Advocates say more than 100 deferred action for childhood arrivals recipients lose their protections every day as they expire, leaving them vulnerable to deportation. Meanwhile, Senate leaders are hoping to send the budget measure to the House for a final confirming vote in time to stave off a government shutdown tonight at midnight. The case of a young Brooklyn woman who says 2 police officers raped her while she was in their custody is highlighting a legal loophole. New York is one of 35 states where there is no law specifically stating that it's illegal for police officers to have sex with someone they've arrested or detained. Albert Samaha wrote about it for BuzzFeed. He says it's not uncommon for the defense in police sexual assault cases to claim the activity was consensual.
Of the 158 officers that I could find since 2006 who have been charged with sexual assault, battery, or unlawful sexual contact, 26 have been acquitted based on the consent defense.
New York's Assembly recently unanimously voted to advance a bill specifically banning police officers from having sex with individuals in custody. Samaha says legislation could pass by the end of this year. New York City's high school graduation rate broke records last school year, tracking at nearly 75% by August of 2017. Statewide, the overall rate was just over 82%. Mayor de Blasio says more seniors graduated across the boroughs and across racial groups.
For a long time, the kind of education you got, the quality education, was determined by zip code, determined by how much money your family had, what neighborhood you lived in. Our job is to end that.
The numbers are also good for city schools in the Renewal program, which focuses on turning around schools struggling with chronic issues like poor attendance and teacher retention. The 2017 graduation rates in Renewal schools ticked up 6% compared to the year before. And if you look out over the water at some point tonight and notice that the Statue of Liberty is not lit up in all her glory, don't panic if you're prone to panicking. It's not a government shutdown. It's just routine work on the monument's electrical system. The National Park Service says the lights that illuminate the outside of the statue will be turned off tonight, but the torch and the crown will still be lit. Sunny today, but cold out. Highs will only reach 32 degrees. It's 28 degrees now in Prospect Park, Brooklyn. And that's the latest. From the WNYC Newsroom, I'm Shamita Basu.
Today's roller coaster news cycle is enough to make anybody queasy. Stories on Morning Edition will move you to stand still and listen.
Our communities are terrified of coming forward, even when they're victims of crimes. I'm talking about all crimes, because they're afraid that if they report the crime, they're going to get deported.
Get the stories you need to know. Listen to Morning Edition every day on WNYC.
WNYC supporters include Virgin Atlantic with non-stop flights from New York to London daily,
More info at virginatlantic.com. Virgin Atlantic. Let it fly. A24 presenting Lady Bird, directed by Greta Gerwig, starring Saoirse Ronan and Laurie Metcalf in a mother-daughter comedy about the relationships that shape us, the beliefs that define us, and the beauty of a place called home. Lady Bird, now playing Cooper Hewitt Smithsonian Design Museum, presenting its Design Access Lab. 2 weeks of learning through workshops, films, dance, and more for visitors of all abilities through February 16th. More at cooperhewitt.org. The Charles H. Repson Foundation, because a great city needs an informed and engaged public. More information at repsonfoundation.org.
It's the Brian Miller Show on WNYC. Good morning again, everyone. You may be aware that the United States is the only high-income country in the world that doesn't have any kind of federal paid family leave law on the books. But here's some news New Yorkers can use. Did you know that as of January 1st, you can receive job-protected paid family leave through New York State? This year, New Yorkers are eligible for 8 weeks, next year 10 weeks, and so on, until by 2021 it'll be 12 weeks of paid leave. And my understanding is this is for time for new kids, sick relatives, or if a family member is deployed overseas in the military. New York is one of only 6 states plus DC with any kind of paid leave law on the books now, and by the time it's fully implemented in 2021 in the way we just described, it'll be the most generous. Now, almost everyone is covered, no matter what kind of job you have, and New Yorkers who take advantage will get paid 50% of your average weekly pay, up to about $650 per week, and that percentage will go up too over the next few years. Here with us now to talk about the new paid family leave law in New York State and talk about a new Republican idea for a federal paid family leave law is Dina Bakst, co-founder and co-president of A Better Balance, which is a national legal advocacy organization that works to advance policies and advocate for working families. She was also an advocate for New York's paid family leave law. Hi, Dina. Thanks so much for coming in. Welcome back to WNYC.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
So I think we should begin by stressing that this law isn't just a maternity leave law. It's not a law for women. It's a law for everyone, men and women, moms and dads, equally on the family leave aspects. Can you explain in more detail who can take this leave?
Sure, absolutely. That's right. This is not a maternity leave only law. In fact, it's not only a parental leave law. While it covers moms and dads, it also covers time off to care for a loved one with a serious health condition, and where, as you said, relieve family pressures when a loved one is called to military service. And so this is has a profound impact in helping all workers in the state that care for a loved one without risking their economic security.
How does the military family part of that work? We just did a call-in on another topic for current service people and recent vets last hour. That's probably the least known part of this, that may be raising some eyebrows right now as we say it.
Yeah, well, I urge you to check out, there's a lot of there's FAQs on our website and on the governor's website, and it certainly is the least known. It is a part of the Family and Medical Leave Act too, the federal FMLA, and a really important component because no other state leave law has this important provision, and it is just really critical to make sure that all working families who need time off to care for themselves and their families are protected. You know, paid family leave has been considered for too long, an individual problem that companies should solve on their, company by company, family by family, but really this is a societal problem that requires systemic solutions. And, as we mark the 25th anniversary of the Family and Medical Leave Act, it was a first step. I mean, we, through that law, we've provided critical protections to millions of families, but here in New York, but there are so many workers that are unprotected, low-income workers, part-time workers, under that law. And so New York's step forward is really transformative. I mean, it's a landmark law that will help really ensure workers avoid the impossible choice between caring for a loved one and a paycheck. And Governor Cuomo, and at his State of the State, really spoke so powerfully about being there for his father when he was dying, and Vice President Biden talked about being there for his son. So this is not just about women. This is about men. This is about all caregivers, young and old.
So listeners, help us report this story. Let's consider this kind of a 1-month check-in on New York State's Paid Family Leave Act, which took effect January 1st. Anybody taking advantage of it, knowing that this just kicked in? Any employers want to call in and talk about how you're adjusting to it, or anybody else with any early experience? I realize this might be a needle in a haystack because it's